Our first speaker today is Conor J. Crowley. Conor is a statistician in the area of population estimates and demography with the Central Statistics Office. He joined him in September 2024. He is a native of Cork City, of course a little detail Conor had to put in, and he has a BSc in Financial Mathematics and Actuarial Science from UCC. Conor's paper is entitled Population and Labour Force Projections 2023 to 2057 and Other Demographic Trends. Let's up to Conor.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Conor and I'm a native of Cork City. I also work in the Central Statistics Office as a statistician. I've been well introduced there by Mick, so I won't go through the rest of the biography. Today I'm going to be talking to you about national population projections over the course of the next kind of 30-35 years, and certain assumptions and results that we got as a result of this project. So here at the Central Statistics Office, we carry out the census, which is what we're famous for, of course, and then on top of that we have a demography division, which is where I work, and that division carries out yearly population estimates as well as projections for the future. Our most recent projections were based off Census 2022, and they are projecting up until 2057 using the census as a base. I'll also talk a little bit about European and global projections at the end of my presentation. So the Central Statistics Office, we're the crowd that do the census, but we're also so much more than that. We're we're part of the Irish State's National Statistical Institute. We've got our legal basis under the Statistics Act of 1993, which is a very robust piece of legislation. It provides an emphasis on confidentiality and independence, neutrality, and high standards. And we work with other Irish institutions within the Irish statistical system to produce our outputs. The 2020s have been a very interesting time for demographers like me, because there's been a lot of shocks to the system, such as COVID-19, the Ukrainian crisis, and these things are maybe short to middle term shocks perhaps, but what is definitely a long-term shock to the system is the declining fertility rates that can be found not only in Ireland but across the entirety of Europe, America, since the beginning of the 21st century, really, to be honest. And I'll talk a lot more in detail about that in a couple of minutes. So other than the projections, the population side of the CSO has obviously the 5-yearly census of population and housing, which is done by the Census Division. There's annual population estimates, both from administrative as well as from survey data, which are carried out by the Demography Division. And then there's also vital statistics products such as births and deaths, yearly reports on those things. So the frontier side of things is, in the 2020s, a lot more emphasis has been placed on administrative data, which isn't data which is collected by survey, but rather how people interact with the state. And IPEDS, Irish Population Estimates, from administrative data sources, is producing population estimates on those lines. So they will be the predominant products detailing population and vital statistics within the CSO. Recent publications on projections, that is white on the screen unfortunately, so I'll just talk through them. Our population and migration estimates were released in August. They cover the 12 months to April. We picked April because that's a 12-month roll on from the census, which was April 2022. The population and labour force projections, which I'm going to be talking predominantly about today, were released in July 2024, projecting from 2023 to 2057 based on Census 2022. And the first two of those products are official statistics, as well as our regional population projections, which were released in January and disaggregated at regional level. NUTS 3, if anyone in the room is familiar. Basically, it's how Ireland is split up into 8 different regions. Historically, Ireland's population is obviously one of the demographic outliers in the world, in that we had a higher population almost 200 years ago, and our population continued to decline for about 100 years until the 1960s, when it reached kind of a low, and it's been increasing. It's almost doubled since the 60s. In 2022, the census of population revealed there's 5 million, approximately 150,000 people in Ireland. It also delineated average age, which was 39-ish, and 12% were non-Irish citizens. So, an introduction to population projections, which is what I'm predominantly here to talk about. Projections illustrate potential future population trends given specific potential scenarios. At the end of the day, projections are tricky. What you've got to do is you've got to have assumptions on fertility, mortality, and migration, and you project what the population will look like given that range of assumptions. Your assumptions have to be kind of reasonable, and a historical example of it maybe going a bit wrong in maybe times gone by was the president of Yale in 1831 used an exponential model, which is shaped like this for population projections in the United States, and he projected over 9 billion people by the year 2020, which didn't really work out for him. So your methods matter and your assumptions matter. These population projections are carried out in conjunction with an expert group of actuaries and other skilled people once in a census cycle. So the census was carried out in 2022, and our projections are done in response to that. So the population projections, the most recent iteration, are for the years 2023 to 2057. So it's a demographic component method, which is in simple terms, census plus births minus deaths plus immigration minus emigration. Don't think I'm forgetting anything off the top of my head. And then you roll that over year after year based on assumptions about births, deaths, and migration, and in the time to come. So regional populations were carried out in conjunction with this, and this disaggregates the national projections into 8 NUTS 3 regions. For example, we're in the Dublin region, the Central Statistics Office in the Southwest region, which is Cork and Kerry. There's 8 of these NUTS 3 regions in Ireland, and we disaggregated the national population into them. There's a shorter time period for these projections because obviously smaller kind of numbers can get distorted a lot faster. So they go to 2042. That also takes internal migration into consideration, which is the movement between the NUTS 3 regions in Ireland, like from Dublin to Mid-East, or Mid-East to Dublin, and all the other possible combinations, as well as international migration flows by region. So fertility assumptions for the national population projections are a significant reduction. This is in line with EU experience, and in the past perhaps 2 decades we have seen a major decline in fertility. The total fertility rate for 2022 is provisionally 1.55, and we project this is going to decrease to 1.3 before the period 2037, and then it's going to remain constant from 2037 to the end of the projections in 2057. So we predict a decline in fertility. This is in line with recent experience in Ireland, where the number of births is going down year on year, and that is the graph I'm looking for. The fertility rate since 1971 has gone from 4 to 1.55 in 2022. So we're projecting that, well, we're using as an assumption that that fertility rate will continue to decline. Mortality assumptions. In Ireland in 2021, there was approximately 35,000 deaths. the underlying causes, 28% were cancer, 27% diseases of circulatory system, 9% diseases of respiratory system, and importantly, 1,241 or 10% were owing to COVID-19. But Ireland as a whole has experienced an improved life expectancy in recent times, as well as falling mortality. A short-term improvement in male mortality rate and female mortality rate of 2.5% per annum. So the trends will result in an increase in life expectancy in our assumptions of 80.2 to 86.2 for males and 83.9 to 89.1 for females over the 35-year period. Migration is the last key component we have to make assumptions on. When these projections were done, there was a massive net migration to Ireland, but net inward migration to Ireland, but over time there's been periods of massive net emigration and net immigration, and if you look at the graphics I'll show you in a minute, it can be rather cyclical. So our three assumptions will be detailed in a second, but we didn't assume that migration is going to continue at the current trend, and our April 2025 rate is approximately 60,000, which will be down from the kind of 80,000 net inward migration that it was when we did the projections in 2024. So this year there was 125,000 immigrants, of which 12,000 were from the United Kingdom, 16,000 were from the EU 15 countries. 15 would include Ireland, so the EU 14 other countries, 7,000 from the accession states, and the US, Australia and Canada accounted for 23,000 of them. 68,000 were other countries, including Ukrainians and international projections. So yes, this is the graph that I alluded to earlier. So our estimated net migration is very cyclical. In the Celtic Tiger, it was obviously very high, and then when during the recession, it actually went to net outward migration for a number of years until 2015, and obviously with shocks to the system worldwide, the net migration has been very high recently, such as the Ukraine war and these types of things. The net migration has been very high, but we project it's going to taper off a little bit, or we assume it's going to taper off a little bit in our projections. So we use three assumptions actually for migration. So M1 is high net inward migration. So that will be a net inward migration of 45,000 per year from 2028 as an assumption. M2, net inward migration of 30,000 per year from 2032. And M3, net inward migration of 10,000 per year from 2032. And a taper down to those numbers over the years, because net inward migration was higher than all three numbers when we did the projections in 2023, 2024. So results, using those assumptions on fertility, migration and mortality, the M1 migration scenario as well as the described fertility and mortality assumptions will give you a 35% increase in population to the year 2057. The M2 will give you a 24% increase to over 6 million people, almost 6.5 million people, and the M3 will give you a 10% increase to 5.7 million people. So in all three scenarios for migration, the population is going to increase over the time period. Though obviously significantly more in the M1 scenario, which is a high net inward migration scenario. The rate of natural increase is births minus deaths. So this is currently positive, there's more births than deaths in the state, but by 2057, under all three migration scenarios, we predict less births than deaths in the Irish state, natural decrease. And as you can see, for the M1 period, or the M1 migration assumption, the high net inward, the the effect isn't as significant, but if we use the low net inward assumption, then the effect becomes more pronounced. So dependency ratios are going to be an interesting story over the next 35 years. Using these assumptions, we project that the young dependency ratio will fall to around 21% from the current 30%, but the older dependency ratio is currently 23%, and that will rise to between 45 and 55% using these assumptions. So the older dependency ratio is the amount of 65-year-old plus divided by, I suppose, the notional labour force, which is 15 to 64. So there'll be kind of one older person for every 2 people in the labour force, approximately, under these assumptions. So, conclusions. We're going to have a significant increase in population under these assumptions. There's going to be an increased population and an increased proportion of the population in the older age groups. There's going to be increased older dependency rates, and there's going to be a pyramid animation now, which hopefully will work. Yeah. So as you can see, this is a pyramid describing the amount of males and females at each single year of age in the country. And it starts in, as you can see, as the years go on, it started in 1961, and this is the actual experience in the past, every 20 years. As you can see, the pyramid is getting pushed upwards, and that's because the population is aging, life expectancy is obviously increasing and so on, so there's more older people, and the pyramid is getting pushed upwards, and we project that to continue as more and more older people relative to younger people are in the Irish state. So, what's happening around the world? The United Nations do global population projections every year for over 230 countries. So they estimate that global population will peak in this century and then begin to decline from about the mid-2080s onwards. Previous editions had the population rising until the mid-2100s, but they've revised their assumptions based on lived experience of countries with mortality and migration and fertility in particular from a global point of view. In the mid-term picture to 2049, the global population will continue to rise. It'll rise sharply. It'll rise by about 1.5 billion in that period of time. There'll be an increasing aging population and a decreasing younger population. So it's a fairly straightforward increase across the world in the period of time. Europe, on the other hand, the population is going to range between a very really narrow range of around 450 million people. The current population is 449 million, and the European image is that the population is going to start decreasing probably around 2050 and continue to decrease as fertility rates keep going downwards. So this is the EU population, which is going to continue to rise. This is without the United Kingdom, by the way. It's going to continue to rise for a number of years, and then the decreasing fertility takes over. Migration is assumed to taper off a little bit, and the population will begin to decline in Europe under these assumptions. The United Kingdom, the Office for National Statistics, projects that the UK population is going to rise to about 73.7 million in the next 10 years or so, which will be a rise of over 9 million from 2021, and 76.6 million by mid-2046. So they're projecting a taper in their gain in population as well from about 10 years' time. And that's their projected graph. So their population is going to continue to increase, unlike perhaps what the Europeans are projecting across the EU 27. So, long term, we are eventually projecting that across the world that we're going to see a decreasing overall global population and an aging world. In the medium term, the United Nations projecting global population is still increasing. The Europeans are projecting that it's going to remain in a narrow range and perhaps start decreasing in that period of time. So thank you very much for your time this morning. I'll take any questions in the Q&A session. Thank you.